quick question. Don't think, did Nelson Mandela die in prison? Or not? If your stomach just tightened, this video is for you. Because millions of people around the world remember the same version of reality with absolute certainty. And it's wrong. Not one person, not a small group. Millions. The same memories. The same details. The same confidence. And that shouldn't be possible. If you've experienced real déjà vu, the kind that hits your chest before your mind can explain it, you're not crazy. If you've noticed synchronicities so precise they feel engineered, timed down to the second, you're not imagining things. If reality has ever felt like it glitched for a moment, like time bent or skipped and no one else noticed, you're not broken. You may be perceiving something most people never slow down enough to register. And here's the part no one tells you. People who sense these things often feel isolated, not socially, existentially. Like you're operating on a different frequency, surrounded by others who don't hear the signal at all. That loneliness isn't a flaw. It's feedback. It's what happens when your perception starts tuning into layers of reality that most minds are conditioned to filter out. Modern science has a name for part of this conversation: quantum consciousness. And it lives right at the edge where physics, neuroscience, and lived human experience collide. At the smallest scales of reality, the universe doesn't behave like a solid machine. It behaves like a field of probabilities. A quantum field where outcomes don't exist until something interacts with them, observes them, participates. That's not philosophy, that's physics. The observer effect isn't a metaphor. In controlled experiments, observation changes outcomes. Measurement alters behavior. Reality responds. And once you really sit with that fact, a disturbing question starts forming in the background of your mind. If observation helps shape reality at the quantum level, what role does human awareness actually play? This is where the mainstream story gets uncomfortable. Because the deeper researchers went, the more the implications started sounding in their own words, too metaphysical. One paper exploring non-local aspects of consciousness was reportedly rejected 14 times. Not because the math was wrong, not because the data failed, but because the conclusion threatened a core assumption that reality exists independent of perception. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's how institutions react when ideas challenge the frame they depend on. Here's what matters to you. Your subconscious mind doesn't just react to reality, it filters it. Your attention, your beliefs, your emotional patterns influence what you notice, what you reinforce, what becomes real enough to shape your life. This is why two people can live in the same city, the same year, the same events, and experience entirely different worlds. You may have felt this during a spiritual awakening, even if you never used that word. A moment when old explanations stopped working, when your sense of self loosened, when the question shifted from what do I believe to why does reality feel thinner than it used to. People going through this often notice changes in vibration and frequency, not as mystical buzzwords, but as lived experience. Your tolerance for noise drops. Your sensitivity increases. You start seeing patterns that were always there, hidden beneath habit and distraction. A hidden reality quietly running underneath the surface. And here's the most unsettling part. Quantum physics doesn't describe a single fixed outcome universe. It describes multiple potential outcomes existing simultaneously until interaction locks one in. That alone raises a question no one has fully answered yet. What happens to the possibilities that aren't chosen? This video isn't here to give you a neat answer. It's here to show you why that question exists at all. So stay with me. This isn't for everyone. But if you're still here, the next part is where things start to get uncomfortable in the best possible way. Before we go any further, subscribe. This channel is for people who feel reality before they fully understand it. And stay until the end, because I'll ask you one question that explains why this keeps happening to you. And once you hear it, you won't be able to ignore it. The Mandela effect doesn't feel like confusion. It feels like betrayal. You don't say, maybe I'm wrong. You say, no, that's not how it was. And that reaction matters. Because psychology already knows memory is reconstructive. We don't store events like files. We rebuild them every time we remember. But reconstruction alone cannot explain why millions of people who have never met share the same alternate memory with the same emotional certainty. That's the part that breaks the mainstream explanation. This is why the Mandela effect triggers something deeper than curiosity. It threatens certainty itself. If something you knew with confidence turns out to be unstable, then something much bigger becomes possible. The idea that reality isn't as fixed as you were taught. This discomfort intensifies during moments of personal transition, loss, identity shifts, spiritual awakening. Times when the subconscious mind becomes more active and perception loosens its grip on a single narrative. That's when synchronicities increase, déjà vu sharpens, and reality starts to feel thinner. At the quantum level, reality doesn't exist as solid objects moving through time. It exists as probabilities within a quantum field, only becoming definite through interaction. The observer effect shows that observation changes outcomes. Entanglement proves that information remains connected beyond space and time. These aren't metaphors. They're verified results. So when people describe Mandela effect moments, they're not describing faulty memory. They're describing a moment where their perception no longer aligns perfectly with the version of reality they're currently anchored to. That misalignment feels physical, emotional, existential. This is why people who experience it often feel isolated. You're not disconnected. You're operating on a different frequency. You're sensing a hidden reality others are motivated to ignore because certainty feels safer than truth. Hold on to this question. If reality responds to perception, where does that shared certainty really come from? At the end, comment the Mandela effect that shook you the most. Don't explain it yet. Just name it, because once you see what physics actually allows, this stops being psychological, and that's where it gets stranger. Here's where physics stops being comfortable. On April 30th, 1957, physicist Hugh Everett III submitted his doctoral thesis at Princeton University. His math showed something radical. The wave function never collapses. Instead of one outcome becoming real, all possible outcomes continue to exist simultaneously, branching into non-interacting realities. This later became known as the many worlds interpretation. Everett wasn't rejected for bad equations. His work was dismissed because the implication was unbearable. Reality was not singular, and consciousness was not outside the system. It was embedded in it. This wasn't speculation. It was mathematics. Decades later, the double slit experiment, repeated thousands of times since the 1960s, kept confirming the same unsettling fact. Particles behave like waves of probability until they're observed. The moment measurement occurs, behavior changes. The observer effect isn't symbolic. Observation alters energy distribution. Perception changes outcome. Now connect that to you. Human consciousness doesn't experience life as a straight line. We experience forks, regret that feels physical, memories that don't belong cleanly to this version of events, moments where synchronicities feel too precise to be random. When you say, "My life could have gone another way," that sensation isn't poetic, it's structural. Your subconscious mind is constantly navigating probability, filtering outcomes, reinforcing patterns, choosing which version of reality feels stable enough to inhabit. That's why spiritual awakening often feels disorienting. Your frequency shifts, your vibration changes, and the old narrative can't fully hold you anymore. In 1931, Nobel Prize-winning physicist Max Planck stated, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. Matter is derivative from consciousness." He said this openly. But they don't teach that in school. Because if consciousness participates in reality creation, then reality is not passive, and control becomes fragile. So ask yourself this. Were you ever really misremembering? Or were you brushing against a hidden reality your mind couldn't fully explain yet? Later, tell me, was your biggest what if about love, career, or identity? Because if this interpretation holds, this is where everything changes. Here's what almost no one says out loud. The Mandela effect doesn't hit randomly. It hits hardest when someone is already questioning their internal narrative. Major life transitions, loss, identity shifts, moments of spiritual awakening, times when the subconscious mind stops running on autopilot and starts re-evaluating the story it's been living inside. When that happens, perception sharpens. Inconsistencies become louder. Reality feels unstable, not emotionally, but structurally. This doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're conscious enough to notice cracks in the version of reality you were handed. In 1983, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet conducted an experiment at the University of California, San Francisco, that disturbed the scientific community. Using EE measurements, Libet discovered that the brain initiates action milliseconds before a person becomes consciously aware of deciding. Conscious awareness lagged behind reality creation. The implication was unsettling. Perception is not where events begin. Now connect that to quantum physics. At the quantum field level, outcomes exist as probabilities until interaction locks one in. The observer effect shows that perception alters energy distributions. Entanglement proves that information transcends distance. If reality is relational, not fixed, then people undergoing consciousness expansion may experience moments where their perception no longer perfectly aligns with the dominant narrative. That's when synchronicities intensify. Déjà vu deepens. Old relationships feel incompatible. Time feels distorted. Your vibration shifts. Your frequency changes. And suddenly, the life you are living feels slightly off. Most people never experience this. They live inside a single unexamined narrative their entire lives. Stability feels safer than awareness. But Nobel Prize-winning physicist Eugene Wigner admitted something few people talk about. He said it was impossible to formulate quantum mechanics in a fully consistent way without reference to consciousness. He wasn't speculating. He was stating a limitation of the theory itself. And they don't teach that in school, because a population that understands perception, participates in reality creation, is harder to control. So here's the question I want you to sit with. What if the moment your life felt divided into before and after wasn't trauma, but awareness activating? At the end, write the one moment that split your life in two. Because if this pattern is real, this is where it gets even stranger. So here's where everything you felt during this video quietly converges. You've just moved through psychology, neuroscience, and quantum physics without realizing it was all pointing to the same place. Memory that refuses to obey consensus. Perception that doesn't align with the dominant narrative. Experiments that show reality responding to observation. Admissions from physicists that consciousness cannot be removed from the equation. None of this was random. It was progressive, layer by layer, revealing something most people are never taught to question. The Mandela effect doesn't need to be literal proof of parallel worlds to be disturbing. What it proves, without debate, is that reality is not experienced equally by everyone. And once that truth lands, something inside you changes. Because if perception differs, if certainty can fracture, then reality is not something that simply happens to you. It happens through you. This is where quantum consciousness stops being abstract. The quantum field responds to interaction, to attention, to energy. Your subconscious mind has always been filtering outcomes, reinforcing patterns, collapsing possibilities into lived experience. You were taught to forget that, not because it wasn't real, but because a person who understands perception, participates in reality creation, cannot be easily controlled. That's why the strangeness you've been feeling lately isn't a defect. It's a signal, a shift in vibration, a change in frequency. When consciousness expansion begins, the old story feels unstable because it can no longer fully contain you. Spiritual awakening doesn't arrive as certain. It arrives as friction, as the sense that there is a hidden reality just beneath the surface of the one you've been living in. Feel this in your body right now, not just your mind. That quickening in your chest isn't anxiety. It's recognition. Energy responding to coherence. Something inside you remembers. Here's the final disturbance you're not supposed to sit with for too long. If consciousness collapses reality, then time, separation, even death do not mean what you were taught they mean. That doesn't make answers simple. It makes the questions deeper. And this is why this knowledge was fragmented, softened, labeled too philosophical, or too metaphysical for classrooms. Awakened perception disrupts systems built on unconscious agreement. You didn't find this video by accident. Alignment always feels like coincidence until it doesn't. Thousands are waking up simultaneously, sensing the same fractures, asking the same forbidden questions. This space isn't entertainment. It's a meeting point, a resonance chamber. You are not alone in this. Before anything else happens, I want you to do something intentional. In the comments, write one sentence only. I am the observer, not as belief, as declaration. Spoken intention is a quantum act. It collapses direction. It feeds the collective frequency of this channel and draws in minds operating on the same signal. This isn't about metrics. It's about recognition. Something has shifted inside you. You can't unsee it. And what happens next depends on a choice you make in the next few seconds. Sit with that, because the next step is closer than you think, and once you take it, there is no going back. If this video put words to something you've felt for years, like it. Subscribe if you want content that actually respects your intelligence. And share this with the one person who always says, I remember it differently. Now watch the next video, because understanding reality starts with understanding perception.